Now, this week marks 6 years since 4 homegrown militants detonated 4 bombs on 3 underground tube trains and a double-decker bus in the heart of London. It was a day that became known as 7/7. 56 people, including the 4 bombers, were killed by the attacks and about 700 were injured. Even more shocking was that 3 of the bombers, Mohammed Sadiq Khan, Shehzad Tanveer and Hasib Hussain, were northerners of Pakistani origin. But what have we learnt in the 6 years that have passed? And what made 4 young Muslims, one of whom was just 18, commit such a deplorable act? Well, to tell us more, we're joined on the line by one of the editors of 7/7, A Muslim Perspective, Mohammed Amin, who's also the treasurer of the Muslim Jewish Forum of Greater Manchester. And we're also joined by the Dean of the Royal Air Force College, Dr. Joel Hayward, who himself is a Muslim, as well as a strategic policy advisor to Pakistani scholar Dr. Tahir ul-Qadri. And the views expressed by our guest tonight are their own, of course. Amin, Dr. Hayward, welcome to Indus.
Good evening.
Good evening. Let's start off with where you were when you got the news of the attacks. Let's start off with you, Amin.
I was at my office at PricewaterhouseCoopers in Manchester talking with my secretary, and she was joking with me about one of our colleagues who's accident prone, that his arrival at a meeting had been delayed because the underground was shut due to a power failure. And then only as the morning went on, we realized that it wasn't a power failure, that there had been explosions and that people had been killed. And then there was a frantic few hours while I tried to make contact with various relatives who work in central London. Fortunately, all of them were safe.
And Dr. Hayward, what about yourself?
I was actually in London on that day, which was a very frightening day. I remember it vividly. I wasn't in any danger. I wasn't close to where the bombings occurred, thank God. But it was a very frightening day to be in London.
So let's take a look at why do you think the attacks were carried out by young Muslims?
Well, it's hard to say why they were carried out at all, as opposed to just by young Muslims. Terrorism is the strangest of things. It's such a wickedness that it's incompatible with any of the great faiths, with Islam, with Judaism, with Christianity, with Hinduism. But yet it happened. And unfortunately, it does seem to happen a lot. Terrorism has got worse, not better, since 7/7. Now, I don't mean in Britain, of course. Thank God we haven't had another case. But certainly there have been over 130 bombings bigger than 7/7 since 7/7. Now, that's pretty frightening.
And, Amin, do you think Muslims feel disenfranchised with wider society?
Muslims are not uniform. There are Muslims at the very highest levels of British society. The chief executive of Prudential, the largest insurance company, is a Muslim. There are Muslims in the House of Lords, Muslims in the House of Commons, Muslim partners at major professional firms like I was. But at the same time, there is a small core of Muslims who do feel alienated and disenfranchised from society. I know because I occasionally meet some of them myself. And it's frightening how big a disconnect there is between them, the way that they think, and they just do not feel at home here at all. We need to reach out to them.
Now, when speaking to young people as well, I mean, sometimes I say it's all about, it's a case of foreign policy. Or do you think there's some other sort of deeper social issues at work as well?
It's not just foreign policy, because there are plenty of people who are concerned about British foreign policy. More than 1 million people went on the Iraq March, but they didn't become terrorists. On top of foreign policy, there is a very perverted interpretation of Islam. These people who set out to kill themselves on the underground, they didn't think that they were going to go to hell by doing so. They thought they were going to heaven. And it's as fundamental as that, such a distorted understanding of their own religion.
And Dr. Hayward, do you think that is the case, though? Young people clearly not really understanding their faith?
Yeah, I think that's true. I speak a lot with young Muslims, and I recently asked a group of young Muslims how many of them had read the Quran from cover to cover. I asked before that how many had read Harry Potter from cover to cover, and of the teenagers in the room, nearly every hand went up. When I asked about the Quran and said, have you read it from cover to cover, even once in English, not one hand went up. Now that was quite distressing to me as somebody who's read it over 40 times. I've read it intimately. I love the book. It's a fantastic book of peace. But you know what? If you do read it, you don't find terrorism in it. So wherever they're getting this from, as Amin said, they're getting it from somewhere else apart from within our faith. They're getting a very perverted, distorted view of our faith.
So who do you think then is to blame if we're pointing fingers at anyone then? Clearly, do you think the mosques then have this responsibility to maybe teach young children their faith where they understand it and maybe learn the Quran, not parrot fashion, but, maybe learn the language Arabic and learn the Quran through English translation?
Well, the problem isn't just with Muslims in Britain. Most terrorist attacks, I beg your pardon, don't happen in Britain. They don't happen in the West. 80% of all the fatal terrorist attacks in the world are done by Muslims, and 95% of those attacks take place in Muslim-majority countries, like Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iraq, Indonesia, and so on. So it's not just simply saying that they're feeling disenfranchised. Even in countries where they are in a majority, the attacks are occurring, and occurring on a frightful scale.
Yeah, indeed. So what do you think we've learnt from the attack since?
Well, I think what we've learned here is to be very vigilant, and our security forces and our police forces, of course, very vigilant. Are they too vigilant? Now, that's a different debate. Are the policies sound for de-radicalizing youth? I don't know. What I do know is, thank God, there hasn't been a second 7/7, and I hope there isn't a second 7/7.
And finally, do you think we need to be doing more within the Muslim community to root out extremism and radicalization?
Yes, I do. Too often you hear Muslims spouting rubbish like the West is attacking Islam, and other Muslims who know better stand idly by. When you hear people saying things that are wrong, it's absolutely essential to speak up. And it's important for Muslims to speak up, not just non-Muslims.
Well, thank you very much for joining us this evening. That was one of the editors of 7/7, A Muslim Perspective, Mohammed Amin, and Strategic Policy Advisor to Pakistani scholar Dr. Talat-Farooq Awan, and also is the Dean of the Royal Air Force College, Dr. Joel Hayward. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.